In the beginning, darkness was on the face of the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And God created creatures of every kind. But humanity has exploited his creation in the name of the almighty dollar. Until today, thousands of species are on the brink of extinction. But there are those who are acting to save endangered species before it's too late.
Papua New Guinea. Its mountains, rivers and forests combine in a display of nature equaling the most spectacular on Earth. PNG, as this nation is affectionately known, occupies the eastern half of the island of New Guinea, as well as a whole host of other islands across an area of almost 500,000 square miles, about the size of California in the United States. New Guinea and the surrounding islands were once part of the supercontinent Gondwana land, which included Africa, India, Australia and South America. Today, this relatively small nation boasts some of the last remaining areas on Earth of pristine forest and unspoiled coral reef. Environments that provide habitat for a wonderful diversity of marine life and a wide range of forest-dwelling animals and plants, many species endemic to this island paradise. PNG is also home to some of the oldest cultures on Earth, including some of the earliest people to use agriculture. Their ancestors can be traced back to the origins of our species in Africa. Their ceremonial dance, or sing-sing, is unique to their clan, as is often their language. Although the population of PNG is only a little over 5 million, there are over 800 individual languages spoken here. Many communities still live in isolation, separated from their neighbouring groups by many days' walk across this rugged terrain. Their inaccessibility hid many of these tribes from Western explorers until the 20th century. In fact, there are accounts of first contact with white people as recent as 1996. But all is not well in this country known as the land of the unexpected. Economically, the nation is facing disaster. Many would say already experiencing it. Employment opportunities are rare and wages are very low. As a result, the people are poor and law and order is a huge problem. Infrastructure is often non-existent. The government is struggling to reverse the situation and at the same time looking for an income source that will provide a stable economic base to the country. The land too is under threat, but unlike many countries whose precious treasures have already been plundered and destroyed, it's a threat that can be avoided. In 1996, around 80 million acres of pristine forest still remained. Today, while 77% of PNG is still forested, 40% of that area has been earmarked for prospective logging, a potential ecological disaster waiting to happen. which means scenes like this that contain an estimated 20,000 higher plant species and which accounts for around 7.5% of the world's biodiversity could soon be replaced with scenes like this. Biologist Ross Sinclair is one of a team of conservationists fighting to save this unique rainforest habitat. He believes that this unspoiled ecosystem has a value unequalled and must be saved at all costs, or else, he says, we will see an increase in the number of endangered and extinct species.
PNG is very important because we still have large tracts of intact ecosystems. So the tool of science that we've developed over, hundreds of years is something that we've got a chance to apply here. In my home, New Zealand, it's too late for many things. Half of our birds have gone extinct. Here, there's very few extinctions that we know about and a limited number of species that are endangered. So there's an opportunity to do research with decent sort of sample sizes and answer the questions, develop the management plans before it's too late.
PNG's rainforest is the third largest expanse of rainforest in the world. Like the Amazon and the Congo, it is a major source of oxygen. Acting as the world's air conditioning, it helps maintain the balance and habitat of a unique biosphere. In PNG, 98% of the land is owned by the traditional clans. Very little falls under government ownership or direct control. In 1993, in an attempt to protect their land, the two language groups, a total of 20 clans who have customary ownership of Crater Mountain in the Eastern Highlands, declared their region a protected area. The aim was to preserve the wildlife, particularly the bird of paradise, whose feathers are an important feature in their ceremonial dress. The Crater Mountain Wildlife Management Area, as it's known, covers 2,700 square kilometres, around 1,600 square miles. Unfortunately, despite Crater Mountain receiving this protection from the local owners, it is not protected from outside influences. Under the government's exploration legislation, mining and logging companies have the power to exploit the place without consultation with the landowners or anyone else for that matter. But fortunately, the last word on full-blown logging and mining lies with the traditional owners. However, it's feared that when dealing with the mining and logging companies, they may not get all the information they need to make an informed decision. And that's where the Wildlife Conservation Society comes in, by helping to provide that information to the landowners. Director of WCS's PNG operation, Andrew Mack, has worked with the local landowners since the area was declared protected.
One of the things a wildlife management area does is to try and set up mechanisms that are adapted and designed in collaboration with the landowners for managing their natural resources. And as we've seen in most of the world, if you don't manage wildlife consumption, things will go extinct. You have passenger pigeons in North America, the most abundant bird on Earth at the time, 4 billion of them or something were wiped out in a matter of 100 years. So it can be very easy to wipe out things here that people depend on, especially larger game like cassowaries, tree kangaroos, long-beaked echidnas, these sorts of things. So we have studies about hunting, how much hunting is going on, what they're hunting, where they're hunting. And then we also are doing studies with the wildlife themselves, like the echidnas or cassowaries, megapodes, things that are important food resources for people, and trying to figure out, okay, well, what sort of recommendations using scientific methods that aren't within the toolbox of people here, what kind of recommendations can we make will help them use that wildlife more sustainably.
With conservation, I think, particularly in the developed world, a lot of money and effort is spent on critically endangered species. And species that are near threatened are ignored until they become threatened. And it becomes much more expensive to manage and protect a species with very few. How do you do any science and find out what you need to know to manage them and save them when your sample sizes are very small? Here, one of the attractions of this country for me, and the reason I work here, is we have time to do the research, find out the information, make the recommendations, put in place the management plans before it becomes critical, and critical is expensive. And PNG doesn't have much money for conservation, and I think here with a limited amount of resources you can make a big difference in terms of preserving this unique biota.
Hunting has always been an integral part of the way of life for the indigenous people of PNG. It's only recently that the increase in human population and subsequent demand has brought the realization that the wildlife is not in endless supply. This collection of bones, gathered as part of the WCS's study into hunting practices, shows the range of birds and animals that make up the village diet. It includes long-beaked echidnas, tree kangaroos, birds of paradise and cassowaries. Animal remains collected in villages suggest that an adult consumes about half a kilo or around 1 pound of wild game every week.
What we're trying to do is collect both anthropological and environmental biological data, so that how best we can try to understand this, the whole ecology of the hunter-animal relationship, so that we can try to put into place some management policies that can better help to conserve or preserve these natural resources.
Michael Kiggill is an intern biologist working with the WCS. He used to work for a gold mining company before he became involved in conservation, after he saw the extent of damage being caused to PNG's natural resources. Currently, he is surveying the impact rural people have on native animals.
I go into the bush and I interview the hunters. I interview them on the animal, the trophies that they bring, then their social, the economical background, and the religious aspect, to determine whether this has some kind of effect on the hunting, and then collect the biological data, how far these hunters go and collect the animal, in what kind of environment or what kind of habitat these animals are likely to be found. And then look at the different species of the animals that these people hunt.
One of the questions on Michael's survey is, how easy is it to find animals today compared to the old days? And invariably the answer is the same. There are fewer and they're harder to find because they're overhunted. In the past, for example, this cassowary trap would have had a good chance of providing a catch. Today it's unlikely to do so. Many cultures observe traditional taboos. The cultural groups of PNG are no exception. There are places that are out of bounds, practices that some cannot observe or participate in, and ancestral spirits that cannot be disturbed. One of those taboos for the Gimi people, one of the two language groups living in the Crater Mountain area, used to be that hearing the sound of this flute, or even catching sight of one by women and children, used to mean instant death. That is no longer the case, as animistic beliefs are increasingly being questioned. And while the loss of those taboos may be good news for the women and children, is often a death sentence for the animals. Similar taboos, you see, also protected some of the animal species, because the hunters were prohibited from entering certain parts of the forests and mountains. The fear was of upsetting ancestral spirits in those places. As those taboos have been reversed, the animals have lost their sanctuary and are being hunted to the brink of extinction. One of these is the long-beaked echidna. One of the biologists working with WCS is Musei Opiang.
While I was at higher at Greater Mountain, I realized that the people were hunting long-beaked echidna. So I decided to do the research with the long-beaked echidna.
The long-beaked echidna is one of the largest and oldest mammals in PNG. Unique to this country, its ancestors are thought to have roamed the earth with the dinosaurs. A nocturnal animal, the echidna is both secretive, inquisitive and relatively unafraid. To hunt one for food or to track one for research is becoming increasingly difficult.
They are critically endangered species. So I actually proved it out in the Greater Mountain. For 3 years, I captured 12 echidnas, 12 long-beaked echidnas.
Unlike short-beaked echidnas, which are found in Australia from mountaintop to the desert, long-beaked echidnas depend on the rainforest. Their principal diet is earthworms, which they eat by prodding the ground with their beak before impaling the worm on the pointy spines of their tongue. Then swallowing the worm in an action not unlike a vacuum cleaner. Another feature of the long-beaked echidna is its body temperature. At 32 degrees Celsius, that's 89.6 Fahrenheit, it's considerably lower than any other mammal in the world. Both these characteristics, its preferred food source and its need for a cool environment, makes the forest an essential habitat for the long-beaked echidna. If the forest is destroyed, so too is the echidna.
We can't just leave the oldest mammal to disappear from us, from the earth. So it's very important for us to do the conservation research on it to come up with some at least management policy to conserve them for future generations so they can have the chance to see this fascinating animal.
Tree kangaroos are another group of species whose future is directly linked with the forest and have for generations been the prey of hunters. PNG is the home to 6 of the 10 known species of tree kangaroo, including the matches, the dorias and the tenkili or Scots tree kangaroo, which is considered highly endangered, a species that according to Jim Thomas is even more difficult to find than the elusive long-beaked echidna.
Haven't seen one yet. We've been looking for the past year and we've found their scats, we've smelt the animal and seen their tracks on the ground and scratches on the tree. Unfortunately haven't seen a live animal yet. You'll probably be able to hear me from Australia when I do.
This is the tenkili's closest relative, the doria's tree kangaroo. In the absence of a tenkili, the doria's serves as a comparison species for Jim's research. They're very similar in body shape and size. The tenkili is a little bigger and jet black in colour, whereas the doria's is chocolate brown. Both species are still the target of the hunter's arrow, which is a huge problem, especially for the tenkili, as it's thought that there are just 100 individual tenkilis remaining in the wild. And if hunting isn't controlled, extinction is a very real possibility.
Where they're found in the Tirelessly Mountains, the human population has trebled in the last 50 years, and there's also been a lot of change in traditional cultural ways, and therefore the animal has been pushed to the brink of extinction.
50 years ago, there were plenty in the bush. They have a saying in Pidgin English, plenty stop long bush. That means there's lots of animals in the bush, but of course now it's not the case. And with a rainforest, you can imagine it is plentiful and abundant in all kinds of fauna and flora. So once upon a time it was okay to just keep taking from the bush, but nowadays it's just not like that anymore.
And there's sex ratios going. That's a young girl.
Jim and Jean work with the Tenkili Conservation Alliance and recognise that it's impossible for the communities to stop hunting Tenkili and other tree kangaroos unless they have access to an alternative protein source. And they think they've come up with the answer.
Our organisation has just started Rabbit Fund, and the idea is that we'll ask the villagers to eat rabbits and not eat tree kangaroos. And this year we'll be distributing rabbits to each of the villagers who have Tenkili on their land, and hopefully that will replace some of their hunting that they do in the mountains for certain animals, especially Tenkili.
Another species of tree kangaroo that has suffered from an increase in hunting and a loss of habitat is the matches. This kangaroo is only found on the Huon Peninsula. It's not known exactly how many are left in the wild, but all indications suggest the population is being reduced at an alarming rate. This is a trend that the Tree Kangaroo Conservation Program, a project of the Roger Williams Park Zoo, Rhode Island, and part of the American Zoo and Aquarium Association, is aiming to reverse. Gabrielle Porolak is a field scientist working on the program.
The goal of the project is to find out the population status of the tree kangaroo and come up with better strategies to conserve tree kangaroos. By doing that, we train the locals on how important the tree kangaroo is, as well as the forest. So we train them how to conserve the tree kangaroos. The tree kangaroos are very, very dependent on the rainforest. So if the rainforest disappears, the tree kangaroo disappears. It speaks for itself. Without the rainforest, there will be no tree kangaroo. So we need the rainforest very, very much. Yeah.
For many animals in PNG, the story is the same. If the rainforest disappears, so do they. But at least for the present, the forest remains, providing a safe environment for animals and birds. This is a male and female New Guinea megapode. The couple are maintaining a nest mound, a complex incubator that is sometimes shared with other courting couples.
Before humans came to the Pacific, there was probably about 50 species that we know from midden sites. Now we're down to 22, 12 of those are endangered. So there's a really strong conservation sort of angle to megapodes. I've studied them in Indonesia, in Sulawesi, 2 species there, one the Maleo, which unfortunately it seems that we're just documenting its extinction. It's heavily over-harvested everywhere it occurs. Also in the Solomons, worked with a community there to develop a sustainable harvesting plan. This community got about between 60 and 80% of household income from selling these eggs. They harvested about 250,000 eggs in the year I was there, but they'd noticed the eggs were just declining and declining and declining.
So the biggest threat to megapodes is again their main predator, humanity. For these species to survive, the tribespeople have to realise that every egg they take from these incubators threatens the very future of this species, and in the long run, their own future. If they take too many eggs, they will upset the delicate balance, and the birds will succumb to extinction.
If you said to local people here you can't harvest these species, they just wouldn't listen to you. It would be pointless. So hunting and harvesting, it's about sustainability, not about banning things. So you have to talk in terms of management rather than preservation, conservation as we sort of think of it. In the West, when we say conservation, we really are talking about preservation, meaning protection of species, protected areas. When you come to Papua New Guinea, where 98% of the land is in customary ownership, and 85% of people get their protein from wildlife, you can't bring value judgments and say that's a beautiful bird of paradise, you can't eat it, because people don't understand that here. You've got to have the approach that it's a beautiful bird from my perspective, it's a nice meal from yours. Don't eat them all, because then you won't have those in the future. So you've got to talk about conservation in terms of how useful animals are and plants, and convince people that they need to protect them to use them in the future.
Not only is the preservation of the forest important for the survival of many animal species, the animals themselves play a vital role in the continued existence of the forest. When crucial links in the chain are broken, the result can be extinction. The cassowary, the largest specialist frugivore. Its diet is 95% fruit and is one of those vital links in the chain.
So you're looking around this forest here, every plant at one time was probably a dropping or a regurgitation of some animal. That's how they get where they are. There's a number of things that have just very large fruits, and so this is different than in a lot of rainforests around the world. These very large fruits are predominantly dispersed by cassowaries, and other birds and bats and things aren't large enough to move these fruits. So there's about 12% of the trees here produce fruits that are too large for anything else to move. This gives you an idea of, this was the seed, and before that it had a pulp around it, and 3 of these would be in a single fruit. So the whole thing is about the size of a rock melon or a cantaloupe. That is in a capsule up in the tree, drops down, splits open on the ground, and presents itself to a cassowary, which then this is covered with a bright red and white arrow. The cassowary comes along, swallows that whole, each of these units, and I studied how far they move them, which would be anywhere from 100 meters to around 1 kilometer before they're defecated out in a pile of seeds on the forest floor. And then what happens is it germinates, as this one is, and sends up a seedling, and then that might establish as a mature tree eventually.
Without the cassowary, the plants that produce these seeds are in trouble, because these huge seeds would stay basically where they drop. Nothing else in the forest is big enough to swallow or to carry them. So if the cassowary is removed from the forest, the chain of life breaks, and those plants would lose the fight for survival. And that is a real possibility, because with the cassowary being the largest native animal in these forests, they are heavily hunted. If they are hunted to extinction or even close to it, there could be a devastating effect on up to 15% of the forest plant life. The cassowary is an enigmatic bird. The male acts as midwife. It is his desire to stay with the eggs during their incubation, which lasts a full 60 days. Once hatched, the chicks bond with and follow the male around for up to a year before they become independent. The cassowary is a very elusive bird with amazing hearing. Andrew Mack says he has spent years tracking them, and they will sneak off at the slightest noise. A concealed camera trap is often the only way to observe cassowary behaviour. But despite their elusive nature, the birds are still successfully hunted. Hunters like to snare adult birds, but they also use bow and arrows or guns to shoot them. Especially vulnerable are the chicks, which any child can find and catch. Once captured, these birds are often kept caged for up to 3 years before they are considered big enough to eat or trade. Cassowaries communicate with each other by making a low booming sound, which not all humans can hear. Like a dog can pick up high-pitched sounds that we humans can't hear, the cassowary's hearing range is at the lower end of the frequency scale.
It's a series of harmonics that they produce that goes down quite low. The lowest we've detected is around 23 hertz, which that component would be below the range that most humans could hear. It's the lowest vocalization we're aware that any bird makes. It's interesting because a low vocalization like that isn't dampened by vegetation, so it is possible these widely spaced cassowaries that are current low density and they're hard to find could be communicating through fairly large distances by these low vocalizations.
Gretchen Druliner of the Wildlife Conservation Society is studying the seed dispersal behaviour of another bird that plays an essential link in the survival and growth of the forest. From her lookout, which boasts what is arguably one of the best forest views this planet has to offer, Gretchen records her observations of the beautiful vulturine parrot. But it's the bird's beauty which could be its downfall.
On its wing it has red feathers that are half red and half black. They're secondaries, and those feathers, along with its red belly feathers, are some of the most valuable feathers in Papua New Guinea. They're valued more than bird of paradise feathers. They're still used in the highlands for bride prices.
Unfortunately, like almost everything else in the rainforest, the vulturine parrot is under threat, which is more bad news for the forest. The vulturine parrot is the main disperser of fruit trees in the forest because it doesn't digest seed in the same way as other parrots do. It also has the ability to open the hard-walled figs, making the fruit available for weaker-beaked birds like the bird of paradise. So like the cassowary, if the vulturine parrot becomes extinct because of overhunting for its feathers, another link in the rainforest's chain of life will be broken. Although hunting has the potential to cause major problems for the forest and the life forces that live there, thanks to data collected by WCS and others, the hunters are becoming increasingly aware that unless they change their hunting traditions and embrace new sustainable management, the natural resources that have sustained their people for centuries will disappear. But that doesn't solve the problems of feeding these tribespeople. The animals of the forest and the produce of their gardens is all they have to live on. Take hunting out of the equation, or at least reduce it to a manageable level, and there is a serious lack of protein in the average villager's diet. The answer is to develop an income source that enables the villagers to buy food and supplies. The Research and Conservation Foundation of PNG believes it has a partial solution to this problem, and that solution is ecotourism. Robert Bino, General Manager of RCF, believes that the natural attractions of the area present a good opportunity for the people of Crater Mountain.
Compared to other areas in Papua New Guinea, we think Crater Mountain has a lot to offer to ecotourists in particular. So there's a lot of bird watching. We received quite a number of visitors from other parts of the world who have been interested in bird watching.
He says that ecotourism for PNG could be huge. Already many people travel to Leh in Morobe province, where hundreds of people each year visit the rainforest habitat. There they can see some of PNG's rarest creatures. Like the Blythe hornbill, the palm cockatoo, the Victorian crown pigeon, and the rare and beautiful bird of paradise. Robert says that the area is also ideal for adventure tours, trekking and caving, to name a few.
We encourage clans to preserve these things so that tourists can come and see these things, enjoy the birds and the resources, and bring in cash. That's an enterprise-based approach to conservation, and we think that it can reinforce the idea of conservation.
Unfortunately, while these so-called primitive people are prepared to change their ways for the good of the land, the people behind what is a greater threat are not so keen to change their practices, despite the fact that their ways will cause untold and irreversible damage. An outcome that will be devastating for the WCS team.
So did you find the oatmeal?
Yeah, Enoch's got the bait.
Some of us here have been working here in this bit of patch of forest for 15 years, doing long-term monitoring. Very remote. It's a 10-hour hike from a small grass landing strip. It's very hard to get here. A lot of people don't want to come here because it's so remote.
It was the area's remoteness that was one of the main reasons that WCS decided to set up here. But despite their efforts to remain as remote as possible and out of reach of multinational big business, still they came.
Back over behind this ridge, a site where an oil company dropped in a couple months ago and said that they want to put a test drill in, and there is no way to stop that or alter how they're going to operate there. So they came in and cleared a 4 or 5 hectare area right in the area where we've been working for 15 years.
He says that if PNG isn't careful, this will be the thin end of the wedge.
There's a big planet of people out there demanding oil and natural gas and timber and all these things, and you realize in a place like this you can't get away from that, really. The whole planet is under this global pressure to be consumed, and you know, everything's under threat. I mean, I'm realizing now if a place like this has an oil well in it, it can happen anywhere.
As you look out from this mountaintop, all you can see, for as far as you can see, is rainforest, and the only disturbance is subsistence gardens from the people who have been living here for thousands of years. And they will have their whole world turned upside down if logging and mining companies get a foothold in these hills.
This rainforest is incredibly under threat. Just in the vicinity we have logging coming from the south. PNG is very rich in minerals. We have gold to the north, and just over here, you know, over this next ridge, we have an oil company drilling. In terms of the people that own these resources, they're desperate for development, so it's a real cocktail for disaster. A resource company wants to do something, wants to put tailings in a river, they can argue that it doesn't have any impact, and the landowners don't know because nobody's done any research. By doing research, by working with landowners, we can provide them with information that says, well, if you do this, this is going to be the result. They may still choose to do that, and that is often the case, but at least they're doing it with their eyes open, and the consequences that we predict, if they happen, well, it's not a nasty surprise for anybody.
But the threats to the treasures of PNG are not restricted to the inland mountainous regions. The coastal areas, particularly in the southeast of the country, have their own riches that are also under threat. The coral reef here comprises the eastern extremity of the Coral Triangle that stretches from the Philippines, Indonesia to PNG and down to Australia's famous Great Barrier Reef. The seas of the Coral Triangle contain more species of fish, molluscs and corals than any other marine region on the planet. The coral that fringes the PNG coast contains the most pristine and diverse marine habitats of the entire region. And within PNG, the richest known marine ecosystems are found in the Milne Bay province. The Milne Bay province, which includes the easternmost tip of mainland PNG, is regarded as one of the most important areas for marine biodiversity conservation in the Pacific. This predominantly marine province harbours 13,000 kilometres, around 5,000 square miles of pristine coral reef. While the Milne Bay environment, like the rainforest of Crater Mountain, is currently in excellent condition, there are concerns for the future. And just as overhunting is one of the threats to the forest, overfishing is likely to devastate these waters the same way as it has in other parts of the Coral Triangle. Something that Peter Mackay of Conservation International is fighting to stop.
It's a situation where you've historically had low population levels, and harvesting of marine resources has been at a subsistence level. Today, however, you've got increasing population levels, especially on the small islands, the small vulnerable islands. We also have the overlying pressures increasing fisheries production through to tourism and urban development. So you've got a whole range of pressures which are just starting to come through now.
Because of international commercial pressure and because of PNG's growing population, there is a real danger that this island paradise will end up going down the slippery slope to environmental destruction that has been the fate of so many other countries around the world. In fact, Henry Balassi, the administrator of the provincial government, says it has already begun.
We have two alternatives. Either we exploit our resources. In other words, we go in and cut in the forest, we take out the marine products, and we almost exploit everything to the point of depletion. We have that alternative, which is happening right now. We have that option. The other option is to conserve what we have, because we know the rest of the world wants to come and see what we've got. So we have that other option to conserve what we have and let the rest of the world come and see it and pay for those resources. And now our view is that we'd like to go the second option.
He says to open the area to tourism as an alternative income source is a viable option because the area has so much to offer. But he says maintaining the resources so the treasures are kept not only for the eyes of the world but also for future generations is the major challenge. But fortunately he has some help, as this is also the aim of Conservation International and a community-based coastal and marine conservation program. The aim is to establish marine protection areas, similar in ownership and purpose to the Crater Mountain Wildlife Management Area. Both initiatives work to the same principle, to put conservation in the hands of the landowners.
The people of Milne Bay still own their resources. There is still a system of traditional ownership and use, which means that they own their reef, they own their fish, they own their islands, they own the land resource base. What we're aiming to do is to work through that system of traditional tenure and ownership and strengthen it, and strengthen the people's ability to manage their own resources.
Noel Wangunu is the Marine Coordinator for Conservation International.
Marine protected areas that the project is thinking or wants to set up is to help the local communities realize the need that their marine resources are depleting, and to help them sustainably come up with a mechanism where they look after their own resources.
And according to Benno Seta, who also works with Conservation International, local tribespeople are embracing the idea.
In Melanesian culture, we have a number of clans, and as their clan totems, they have a number of animals, a number of fish, a number of trees as their clan totems. And so they saw that their clan totems were at threat, you know, and so this having a management program put in place for them would be like good for them, so that when the younger generations come up later on, they will tell them that look, these are our clan totems, and they have been protected.
Communities very much rely on their gardens for food and nutrition. What we are promoting is that just like they have gardens on land that they manage sustainably, they rotate, they have fallow years, all those sorts of things, the garden in the sea, the garden that is their reef, also needs to be managed in a sustainable way. As the population goes up and increases, the pressure will increase, especially on the really small islands. And if they're not managing their coral reef like a garden, then what you'll end up with is a situation where you'll get local extinctions in species such as shark or beach demure.
We realize that go exploiting your environment unchecked, you're going to have the difficulties that other places have. Here, even in Papua New Guinea, we've seen examples in, say, in the New Guinea Islands where they just about logged everything out, and the runoff from the soil is spoiling the reefs and everything else. So we don't want that to happen here.
The parallels between the threats to the coral reef and the rainforest are both obvious and disturbing. Both environments are the last remaining examples of their type in the world. They are that important. Sadly, both could easily succumb to increased hunting and harvesting by the people of PNG, and worse still by international commercial logging, mining and fishing interests. But there is hope. The threat to Papua New Guinea's pristine environments will always exist. There will always be outside interests striving to exploit the millions of acres of forests and the millions of tons of minerals hidden beneath those pristine forests. And there will always be other nations seeking to plunder the fruits of the seas around this tiny nation. However, there are those working to save these two pristine environments before it's too late.
My hope is that, humankind will wake up a little bit and realize that, it just can't keep eating everything on the planet, consuming like they have been. And if that happens at a time where a place like New Guinea hasn't been totally cleared, this will be an island of, really a paradise on earth. And people will really, admire Papua New Guinea because they got through this period of human history sort of without destroying their natural resources. So I think there's hope, but we're in a really transition phase, I think, in human history, where you got to hope that some places survive until we smarten up a bit.
The question that remains then is, will we learn from the mistakes of the past and ensure the treasures of Papua New Guinea remain intact, so there is at least one example of pristine rainforest and coral habitat left on this planet? Or will we allow it to be lost forever?